Morning, everybody, and this is LíR and welcome to this edition of LíR Confidential with my special guest, Mr. Ray Bassett. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Pat.
I'm absolutely delighted to have you. As you can see from our backdrop, we'll be getting to that book later on, Ireland and the EU post-Brexit. But Ray, first of all, for people who may be coming to you for the very first time, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Dublin. I grew up on the Navan Road area of Dublin. My father was a real engineer, I think, maybe 4 generations, and my mother from a place in County LíR called Rosenallas, right up in the Slieve Bloom Mountains. So
Oh, big
it
God.
was an urban rural marriage, and grew up a very happy household. Sometimes people would want to tell me that, when I was growing up in the 60s, it must have been misery. I said, actually, it was a very enjoyable childhood. I
Yeah,
don't bear the scars like a lot of people of a childhood.
I think we're around the same age, but we won't tell anybody. I think growing up in the 60s, the late 50s, early 60s, loads of people had nothing materially, but I don't know, we seem to be happier, as you said, Ray, you know?
And I think poverty is often a relative thing. You know, the country might have been poor. We mightn't have had a huge amount, but we weren't aware of that. We were just ordinary people working, and all our neighbours were exactly the same. And
Exactly.
great people who pulled together.
Yeah, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And then you went to O'Connell School.
Yeah, my mother and father. My mother was, as I say, from County LíR, but she was very interested in education, and O'Connell's had a very good reputation at the time, and she put me on the bus when I was 7 and brought me down every day to O'Connell's, and sort of got me a very good education there. I write in the book that a lot of people have had bad experiences, but the school I went to was it was tough school. The teachers were tough. You weren't mollycoddled in any way, but it actually benefited me an awful lot, because remember, my parents would have left school not long after primary school, and I came in, and I'm sure yourself, Pat, with the benefit of Dun O'Malley's education reforms, and it was great that we were able to go to secondary school and onto university and essentially be subsidised, which was great. But O'Connell's was a great school. It was a school which had a big effect on me, because over 100 of O'Connell's students took part in the 1916 Rising, and three O'Connell's people were executed the one day in 1916: Con Colbert, Eamon Cant, and Sean Houston. They all at different times had gone through O'Connell's, and one day in May they were executed together. And it was a school that Sean Lamass went to, Ernie O'Malley went to, Sean T. O'Kelly. So it tended to be quite a nationalist school when you growing
Yeah,
up. And one of the most famous teachers I had for several years was Micheál Murchig.
Oh, good way. And he's still hale and hearty. Fair play to him.
Absolutely. And
I didn't realise now that those three people, Con Colbert, Eamon Cant, and Houston, all went to O'Connell School.
All went to
And
O'Connell's
the radio stations, we have Colbert Station up the road from us here in Limerick.
I think he was from Limerick originally, but he spent some time. Ernie O'Malley's family, I think, were from Mayo, and they came up again. But the school had our own museum, our own 1916 museum. So you're kind of, from a very early age, you were brought up in that kind of tradition.
And did you have a big thing not to have for the 50th anniversary of the 1916 and 1966? Did you have a big input into that?
We did, and Sean Lamass, who was an ex-pupil, was in. Funnily enough, the school was really proud of Sean Lamass, but John A. Costello also went there. So you'd go down to Sean Lamass Laboratory, you'd go down to Sean Lamass grounds, but you never heard anything about John A. Costello. So I'd say there was a slight bias in the teachers, but yeah, we do all, and everybody was put up. And by 1966, we were all members of the FCA, so we were all marched around.
I was one of the heroes of Cuchulainn carrying this lance in the race course in Mallow when De Valera came down to us, and I shook his hand, or he shook my hand rather, the poor man. in 1966. I think he was nearly blind at that stage, you know. Poor. Anyway.
Mine fairly early on, I think. You know, the more you read about him in the archives, he was regularly getting eye treatment. For instance, when he was going to Switzerland for all those League of Nations meetings, it took times to have operations and various things in Switzerland. So his sight, I think, from very early on wasn't great.
Yeah, yeah. And so O'Connell School honed your sense of awareness for, I suppose, the Republic of ours as well as the education. And then you went on to Trinity, Ray, after that, did you?
Yeah, the reason I went to Trinity, I got one of these, you know, when Dun O'Malley came in and said that they were, you know, if you got a certain number of honours, you were going in, and we qualified for the grant. I went to O'Connell's because my brother went to UCD, and I lived in the Navan Road, and UCD had moved from the centre of the city out to Belfield. Now, if you're travelling from Navan Road to Belfield, it was a real ordeal to cross the city, you know, I probably was very unprepared to go to university, because I remember those days I actually decided on the bus going in what subject to do. And I remember my father sort of saying, do science, you get a job.
Right.
Don't. So that was the level of the commitment and the informality of it. But I chose Trinity because of its location, because it was easier from where I was. And my brother
right
had
into town.
traveling over to Belfield.
Yeah.
So that's I chose, and to be honest, I was glad I chose it, and met many good friends there.
And how would you describe your time there overall?
Enjoyable. You know, if you're from Dublin and you're going to university locally, it probably isn't as big a change. Say if somebody like my cousins down in LíR should come up. So
Right.
the people I went to, I mean, my best friends are still the people I met in O'Connell's. I actually met them in second class in the primary. So
Right.
the people I socialise with now are the people who know me best. So they know if I'm giving them a load of BS or anything like that, you know. So I went to Trinity, but not quite as immersed as a lot of people do when they go to university. I stayed very much. For instance, I played football. I played Gaelic for Trinity, all right, but I really played with my home GA team, and I was more based in my own area and go into Trinity and come back. I didn't immerse myself in the college.
Right. And when you did your PhD in biochemistry, the study of the vitamin folic acid, I was reading up on it.
Yeah.
And what prompted you in that respect? Obviously, your teachers and your lecturers would have had big influence in you anyway, you know?
Yes, there was an American lecturer there by the name of Joe Brown, and Joe was you know, I got friendly with him, and Joe sort of said, you know, if you want to do a PhD, you come to our laboratory. And the good thing about science at the time was that it was reasonably well funded, particularly by people like Wellcome and things like that. So we were actually paid to do research.
Right.
So you got it wasn't a big wage, but you got a bit of a wage from them. So it was quite possible to work in the biomedical laboratory and do the PhD at the same time. And
Right.
you know, in some ways, it's probably, if I was going for a career in academia, it's much better to change universities. But I was comfortable. I never left home till I got married. When I was 25. So I there's a degree of social inertia about the place. So I was living at home, getting well paid, and I got not well paid, but paid enough to sort of keep you in.
And how many were in the family, Ray?
There were 5 of us.
Where'd you come?
I tell people I think I've over 50 first cousins, but I said only 5. We're by that standard, we were probably standard whatever. 5 children in a family was standard then, I think.
Yeah, we had a small family of 9 ourselves in the village I grew up. But anyway.
The Higginses across the road had 14, you know, and
oh my God.
Of course, people didn't comment on it. You know, I have 5 children myself, and people almost think I'm an environmental vandal.
There you go. That's absolutely true. And there's a friends of mine, they have 6 children, and people, they have the talk of the place, as they say. But anyway, so did you pursue a career in that then, or what happened?
I did. I went to I finished a PhD, and I went to work for the Mater Hospital doing clinical biochemistry and some
Brandon
research.
Handy again.
Yeah, it was just down the road again. And then my mother, who was always a very strong influence in my life, and my mother was education mad, but she used to also go through the papers looking at ads, and she'd sort of say, "You can do that, you can." And she applied for jobs for us all. So she saw this and she said, "You're wasted talking to those test tubes." So she actually got the application for this
A
diplomatic
practical
corps,
woman.
and I said, "Look, they never take somebody with a science background." So I did the aptitude tests, and I for some reason I came through. And I also think there's a huge element of chance in that, because you
Right.
could perform well in one day, and somebody who's very good performed the other. I didn't have a huge expectation, and maybe that helped me, that I didn't feel under pressure when I was doing it. I had a job in the matter, but I was always interested in international affairs, and particularly foreign affairs were dealing with the North. I was very interested in the North.
And were
And
your family, sorry, Colin Coster, were your family, would you describe your family as a political family or just what?
my mother was quite Republican. She used to get my brother to sing Robert Emmet and things like that. My father would be very much a trade union man altogether. Like, my grandfather was locked out in the lockout, and he'd tell you everything like that. So he had virtually no time for nationalism or anything like that. And my mother would sort of wrap the green flag around me. So
Right.
and they got on famously. I mean, they had different views on that. And my father was a strong socialist. My mother would be a Michael Collins kind of Fine Gaeler. So it was good. They would have good political arguments, but they were never involved politically. The only thing they agreed, they didn't like Dev. That's all I
Yeah.
remember growing up.
Hmm.
Whereas in school, Dev was a hero. So you got different influences.
You did, of course. And of course, people forget, like you and I and that generation grew up in the late 50s, early 60s. There was still a huge connection to the Civil War. There was a huge residue left in education and all that of the Civil War time, the divisions.
Oh, there was, and there were
And it
people on our
manifested
road.
itself in education, in the school, in classroom.
And I was growing up, there were people on the road who'd taken part in the Civil War. Older men would have actually fought in it, and
Yeah.
so it was very lively, and people were either Dev or anti-Dev at the time,
Yeah.
and that was the way. If an election in the 1950s still had echoes of the Civil War.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you're in the matter now, and instead of looking and talking to test tubes, you're in the matter, as your mum said, interacting with human beings.
Yes.
And how long did you stay there, Ray?
I stayed a year in the matter, and it was a great hospital. The staff were terrific in the hospital, and I enjoyed my time there. But the opportunity arose, and for an Irish mother, a job in the civil service or the bank, and you would be very strongly pressurized to take it. But it didn't have to pressurize me very hard, and I jumped at the chance, because I always had a kind of a thing. I'd love to serve the country. I'd love to
Yes.
sit behind the title Ireland,
Yes.
after all that, and having sort of got it on from the year I went into O'Connell's till I left. It was an opportunity I was delighted to take.
And an opportunity came up, and what happened after that? Where did you go, or where did it send you?
I came into the department in Dublin, and to be honest, again, I wasn't that well prepared, because when you come in, it's all about writing and doing drafts and briefs, and in science it's really just putting down the figures and all. So it took a while to actually adjust and to sort of learn civil service English, and the place was a fairly stuffy place. I wrote in the book that moving from analysing body tissues in the Mater Hospital, overcrowded with people, and suddenly to arrive in the central Dublin home of the Guinness family with these marble statues and things like that. So it took a little while to adjust. But
Yeah.
again, it's it's all about people, that you work with people and you get
And
friends.
who was your boss? Who was the minister that time?
My first minister was Michael O'Kennedy.
Oh yeah, a tallest Tipperary man.
I came in, I think it was 1978. It was
Right.
just before a change of government, and Michael O'Kennedy was there. I did as a young person coming in. I subsequently got to know Michael O'Kennedy, but at that time I wouldn't have had a huge amount to deal with him.
Yeah.
And the first real minister I met or got very friendly with would have been Peter Barry, a very decent guy, a very, very decent.
Barry's tea fame down in Cork.
Absolutely.
I met him many times through other things, and I always found him such a fantastic human being.
Yeah, and I used to travel to Britain because early on, I think maybe because of my accent and various things, I tended to be dealing with the Irish community abroad. They weren't sending the Oxford educated people there, and I travelled a lot with Peter Barry. He had a real love for the Irish in Britain, and you go over and you'd have this. I had this idea that Peter Barry was kind of dour and things. He'd go into the sort of the Irish club in Birmingham, and he'd become a new person, and everybody seemed to know him. He was really good, and he was also very cautious. I remember if somebody had applied for a grant or something, they'd be asking me, can we help this centre? I'd say yes. And he sort of said, give me the papers. I just want to go through everything. So I know I'm not promising anything I can't deliver. So I must admit, he was one of the best ministers. I mean, we had some very good ministers afterwards, but Peter Barry was an exceptionally good minister and an exceptionally decent human being.
Yeah, and he was highly regarded across all the political parties, no doubt. I don't think there was a partisan bone in his body.
No, and as I said, he was actually very good. Maybe because of his background and maybe because of business, he was very good with staff. He knew how to organize. He wasn't throwing his weight around. He knew he was in charge. He didn't have to show it. Some ministers come in and they're almost under pressure, whereas Peter Barry came in and kind of assumed the role. Responsibility sat easily on his shoulders.
Yes, that's very good. So, and how did you progress upwards then to find yourself over in Canada?
Well, my first big job was I was involved in the 1979 presidency of the EU, and we had Margaret Thatcher over and Helmut Schmidt and a whole series of them, which was very exciting. But at the end of it, they dispatched me off to Copenhagen.
But before that, what was your impression of Thatcher on this removal?
Thatcher was an extremely focused individual. She was. That was the summer where "Give Me Back My Money" was. Of course, I was the boy running around with the bits of paper, I almost giving the tea. But she was very direct, not particularly likable.
You had no influence in that famous teapot, no?
No, it wasn't at the teapot summer, but we actually had to convert some of the rooms in Dublin Castle into bedrooms for them, because it wasn't that long after York Biggs had been blown up and that we didn't want to risk bringing her in and out to the British. See, so yes. helicoptered into the castle yard, and of course they got to stay in the place, and that was the time we had Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, and the French were sort of saying everything the British get, we've got to get. But we said, look, the British are under particular security threat at this time. This was the height of the Troubles.
Absolutely.
So she was, as I say, she was very brusque, and she wasn't really interested in being friendly to people. That Jack Lynch was Taoiseach at the time.
Yes.
And it was the very end of Jack Lynch's period. And Jack was trying to be nice to everybody, but it was a fractious summit.
Yes, I no doubt about it. And so you found yourself over in Denmark.
Yeah, they originally wanted to post me to Buenos Aires, and it took me a while, as I said, to adjust to the foreign affairs thing. And the thought of Buenos Aires kind of frightened me a bit. So I deferred on that, and then they posted me to Copenhagen, which was fine. It was just across the road from us, and it was a country very similar to Ireland. And
was that your first time there, Ray, in that country?
That was my first time there, and spent over 4 years there. I still keep in touch with them, and I was at that age when I was playing both. There was no Gaelic there, so I switched to soccer and rugby. And the Exiles Rugby Club there, I still get the results from them.
I know. I look at my local club all the time. Yeah.
What do you call it? It was the best thing that ever happened, because I arrived in, and I got a whole set of friends. And you know, the GA skills are somewhat transferable. You know, particularly handling and things like that was
Yes.
transferable. And it was, I remembered, it was a mixture of Danes and people from all over the world, and it was a great. And we were better at the social side than at the rugby. But it was probably the best thing I ever did was join that club, because I immediately got a whole set of friends in Copenhagen. And it was a very good time. We started our family when we were in Copenhagen. Also,
I meant to ask you, you were married then, were you?
I was married then.
Yeah.
Married a girl from Tipperary, a Munster lady.
That's all right too. That's all right. Give her a taste of the capital and the culture and the cuisine of Dublin. It's great. But you were you were over there for 4 years, Ray. And overall, you would say, I suppose you know, was there any challenges, or did you just settle in okay?
It was the challenges were that, you know, were essentially some young Irish people at that stage were getting involved in drugs and things like that. In Copenhagen, at a place called Christiana, where there was a free drug area, and we had a group, we had several people in prison, and I used to do the visits. So when we came back to Dublin, I'd be walking through O'Connell Street with my wife, and the sort of ne'er-do-wells were all saying hello, Ray. So she was very suspicious. How do you know that guy? But it was.
Did you tell me everything about yourself?
Yeah, and it was also during the time of the super levy. I remember we had Garrett over.
I remember that, yeah.
Denmark and Ireland weren't particularly happy with a super levy because we're both very strong dairy countries, you know.
Yes, they are.
It was good. There wasn't much of an Irish community there. And I still remember I had Jimmy Brogan at the Brogan Gaelic family beside with us, and the two of us were listening in to try and listen to the All Ireland between Kerry and Offaly, the Seamus Darby goal. And I'll always remember the sound was coming in and out, you know.
Yes.
Long before technology.
That was wonderful altogether for Offaly anyway. It's fantastic, great characters. And after Copenhagen, did you go straight somewhere else, or did you come back?
I came back onto the international trade side of things, and I was dealing with companies abroad and various things like that. And in that I got to know Peter Barry, who was very interested in the economy and things like that. And I used to write. I was promoted a little further up the ladder, and I started writing speeches on the economy. And then after the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985,
yeah,
Barry created a new area. A lot of people were going to Belfast and things, and Peter Barry transferred me into, you know, asked for me to come into the Northern Ireland side of things, and I'd continue writing speeches and that for him on the Northern Ireland. So I moved into dealing with issues relating to Northern Ireland and Britain at that stage.
I suppose, obviously, the troubles have been spoken about so much. We all know the history of it. I was in the army myself from 69 to 73 at the height of it, you know. But that time in the civil service in the 80s and the run up to the 90s, I suppose, was very challenging for all politicians, you know, because you had to be very diplomatic is the wrong word to use, but you made an awful lot of contacts, and you met an awful lot of people, I presume, from Northern Ireland.
I did. A lot of my time I was on the road. In the early 70s, the sort of information gathering and essentially all the operational stuff in Northern Ireland was transferred to the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, there was a few reasons for that. A lot of nationalists in Northern Ireland didn't like the idea that the Department of Foreign Affairs was dealing with the North, which you could understand. But the reality is that once you had direct rule in Northern Ireland, it was the British government which were in charge. So if you wanted any change, you had to talk to the British government. And plus the fact is, a lot of the people in Foreign Affairs had strong connections with the North. So the expertise was there. So the government, even under Charlie Haughey and Gareth Fitzgerald, switched to all the the vast majority of the information gathering up there, because you couldn't, if you used the army, it was almost a provocation, and there was also the aftermath of the arms trial and things like that.
Yes.
And the guards were not very keen on going north, so you could send a civilian civil servant up, it would be much less contentious to talk.
Absolutely, without a uniform, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so the next for several years there, I was up and down to Belfast all the time, and dealing with the political parties. Then we didn't talk to Republicans at that stage, because our a lot of the unionists would talk to you privately. But an interesting and a tough time for people, particularly when we established an Irish government office in Maryfield, inside basically Palace Barracks in County Down, and there was a huge amount of unrest in the unionist community about that. There was at one stage there was tens of thousands outside Maryfield calling for it to close down. So the people there were living under a certain amount of threat, and had to be very cautious.
And during those trips, did you come across John Hume?
I did. I came across John Hume a lot. I have our first cousins in Derry, and his wife Pat had taught my, it's everything in Ireland, as you know, so had taught my cousins, and she knew them. So John kind of said, even though I'm a dub to my very tips of my fingertips, John always said this fella has Derry connections. So you know the way he uses it. But yeah, I used to, and sometimes John would arrive in Dublin, and this much more later. And if a government minister couldn't meet him or something, sometimes they asked me to take care of him. So I got quite friendly with John, and he was a huge intellect. I mean, over the years, his intellect deteriorated. There's no doubt about that. But yes. I remember once it was a bit later. Brian Cowan asked me to take him to dinner. He said, "He's down here. I'm tied up. Will you take him to dinner?" I remember I rang a posh restaurant in Dublin, and they wouldn't give me a table. And I said, "By the way, I'm with John Hume," and everything was cleared. Of course I do. But when we went into the restaurant, we didn't get 5 or 10 minutes without everybody coming up to get their photograph. And John loved it. It wasn't an imposition at all. He'd kind of say, "Oh, it's terrible," but he'd love it. And like, I think the most successful, Tony Blair was very like this, and so was Bertie Ahern. The most successful politicians are people who love people. And it's not feigned with them. I've been with them long enough to know.
No. I totally get it. I get that way. And I'm not surprised. I never met the man, unfortunately. I have friends in Derry and Belfast, but we lost him, of course, recently. But I think there's a lot of history to be written yet on that period, and there's no doubt that John Hume will loom very, very, very large in that narrative anyway.
Yeah, I think I was at the Good Friday. I was part of the delegation doing Good Friday Agreement, and somebody asked me what was John Hume's role, and I said John Hume wrote the plan. We were just filling in the dots. John Hume wrote the plan in the 60s and 70s.
Yes,
we were actually completing it. John was a great man for the strategic thinking of where things were going, and that was his forte. He could see things very clearly, very early on.
This is LíR Confidential on LíRmedia.tv, and my special guest this morning on this edition of LíR Confidential is Ray Bassett. Now, Ray, when did yourself and your family uproot and go to Canada?
Well, I went to Canada. It was we'd gone through Good Friday, and there had been several changes, and I was about 6 years out from when I thought I was going to retire. So I had several times I've been asked by ministers and Taoiseach, would I be interested in being an ambassador? And I said, no, I actually like being, I'm sorry to say this, Pat, but I am a bit of a homeboard. And when Canada came up, I had been over to Canada quite a bit. We had set up a thing called the Irish Abroad Unit. It had come out of the Good Friday Agreement and the new constitution, new Articles 2 and 3, which said Ireland cherishes its diaspora. So they gave me the job of sort of translating that into some type of practical policy, and we started actually going around the world. We link up, and
yes,
even on occasions, like I remember in the Buenos Aires, we had to refurbish the hurling club, so there was a bit of money there. So I'd been over to Canada a few times, and I really liked the Irish Canadians. I found them a much nicer people. I've got friends in America. I don't want to say anything about them, but they were much nicer people. They were very, very thankful for any help the government can. And the opportunity, the job was coming vacant, and it was clear after the financial crash that there was going to be whole-scale changes. So it was as well for people who'd been there before to get out, and I took the opportunity to go to Canada for 6 years.
And how long were you there?
6 years, which is a long time for any.
That's a long time.
Yep. And as I said, it's a great country. Fairly soon after I arrived there, the things fell in very heavily in Ireland, and my job in Canada was to get Irish people into Canada. It sounds terrible, but that's what I gave that my number one priority, and I talked about that in the book. Is I went around to all the ministers and the Prime Minister with a begging bowl and said, we've got to make visas available for these people because they're not going to get jobs at home. It'd be great if they even did 2 or 3 years in Canada and come back in better time. And the one country that really rallied to us, which probably hasn't gotten up, is Canada. Canada created
there's a huge Irish, there's a large Irish community, I presume, in Toronto.
In fact, Toronto traditionally wouldn't have been the main Irish city. The main Irish cities are obviously the east: Newfoundland, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Montreal. They were a lot of the Irish migration to Canada. I won't go in for hours of it, but it's mainly pre-famine, and it's overwhelmingly from Munster. Like the Blackwater Valley in Cork sent 1,000 families to a place in Canada. Which I never heard anything about, but they're all around the 1830s and things like that. So these people are still regard themselves as Irish. They haven't a huge. They still have the Irish.
I'm from North Cork, just outside Mulla, and I'm not aware of that. It
was run by a fellow named Peter Robinson, who populated a whole area. And there's a place in Canada called Peterborough, and everybody thinks it's due to Peterborough in England. It's not. It's to do with Peter Robinson, who decided that Cork families were good at farming, so he went after the second sons and got them. So there's a whole area. When Leo Varadkar heard about this, he said, "Will we drive up there?" I said, "Well, it's 8 hours drive up to it." But he had read a bit about it and was quite interested in this big settlement up there. So you get the name Donahue's, you get a lot of those names from around there,
That's interesting now. So you were obviously based in, my daughter actually spent a time in Saskatoon.
Saskatoon, yeah.
Which it's very rural anyway.
It is.
But you spent 6 years in Canada. Obviously you still have friends there. And politically speaking, what was it like dealing politically on a political level with the authorities in Canada? What Prime Minister was there when you were there?
Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister.
All right.
His wife is Lorraine. She's Lorraine Teske or Tesker, and her family are from Rathkeil. And she's and she told me she's a Palatine German. The thing, and I knew nothing about it. I actually said it to Michael Noonan, and Michael Noonan gave me a big long lecture as to what they're all about. But at that time, the Minister for Immigration was Kenny, the Minister for Finance was Flaherty, and the Minister for Defence was Peter McKay, whose family came from Valentia Island. So we were very unusual. They were a conservative government, and they were generally right-wing, but they were very, very pro-Irish. So
because of, as you said, his wife, people from Rathkeil.
And also, Pat, there was an element that the Conservatives, particularly out west, Saskatoon and that, they liked the Irish and the British and particularly the Scottish migrants. So they started changing the rules that you had to have English, very good English or French. So they started changing the rules to support us. But they did accept. I remember when Jason Kenney, who's now the Premier of Alberta, but when he was attacked in Parliament over favouring the Irish,
yes.
he said in Parliament, at least they came and asked me. People like to be asked. They asked for extra visas, and I gave it to them. And it was very, very good. It was a very unusual time in Canada that you had so many. We had Mark Carney, who was the governor of the central bank, and I outline in my book how Mark Carney intervened during the bailout and the promissory notes with Michael Noonan and the Canadian Minister of Finance to soften the EU policy on Ireland. And you know, it was lucky. Everywhere I went, the doors were open. There's not a city in Canada that doesn't have a big Irish connection. And even talking about the prairie provinces, Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
minister, they were big infrastructure projects. So they were organising employers to go to Ireland during the middle of the recession to try and recruit building workers, and they were giving them, some of them, permanent residence if they were of certain trades. So it was a time where Canada had a huge demand, Ireland had a surplus, and it worked well on that. And hopefully a lot. And I write about this. I said I felt a bit uneasy about this because I had kids at the same age as those that were going out,
Right.
and it was great to get them. But you know, I didn't. Although I have two of my kids do live abroad now, I didn't rear my kids for export. I wanted them to be home. So it was slightly, you know, that it was. Wouldn't say schizophrenic, but better to get them jobs in Canada.
Now, before we get on to the book, you're involved through the EU through policy exchange.
Yeah.
What is that, Ray?
Policy exchange is, and I get regularly attacked on this, Pat. Policy exchange is probably the I would say the most. I'm not heavily involved, but policy exchange is probably the most prestigious think tank in Britain. It is generally right wing, but it has left wing as well, and it's something we don't have in Ireland, which I'd love to see. Is that, you know, if these are institutes usually set up with private money, and they put forward ideas all the time.
Right.
In Ireland, we have the IIEA, but that's very dependent on government. We've got the European movement. It's again on government. We don't have these independent bodies who put out sometimes cracked stuff and sometimes good stuff. But they asked me because I had been
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'd been critical of what I thought was the Irish government role on Brexit. I thought we were making things more difficult for ourselves, and they asked me to write some papers on it. But I'm also involved with another think tank in Britain called Politia. But you get a lot of these in Britain and Canada, where, say, somebody who's made an awful lot of money sets up an institute. Here we tend to set up business schools like Smurfit Business School or Ryan Business School. In other countries, America and things like that, you see institutes, and they put out policy papers, and sometimes they actually put out policies with different people which contradict each other.
And Ray, I think there's, and I agree with you about Ireland's role in the EU Brexit negotiations. There's no doubt about that, and they did fall down in that, in my opinion, as well. But the idea of sidelining people because they have a contrarian view about anything, the easiest way to do, I find, I hate this word mainstream media, but I think we'll have to use it in making this point, in that they'll put a label on you and then they'll make you irrelevant, your viewpoint. I find that in the media a lot. You know, that even if you're making sense and your ideas make perfect sense and they're backed up with facts and science and all of that, but because it doesn't fit the narrative of what we call mainstream media, in Ireland anyway, which is, I don't know I don't want to say too much about it out loud, but so as I said, they put a label on you, you're in that box and you're sidelined and your idea.
Pat, that book that I wrote would never be published in Ireland. I gave it to every publisher in the place. but I have a very good friend, Tim Pat Coogan. And
yes.
Tim Pat doesn't agree with me, but myself and Tim Pat, we meet and we have a good barney, and we're really long-term friends.
Right.
He approached some of the, because he's a very successful author, he approached them and they said, you know, my friend is writing a book, and he was told that book will never be published in Ireland. So I said to Tim Pat, I don't care, I'm going to send it to every one of them. And of course they all turned it down. Now it's quite successful. It's in the top selling on Amazon in Britain and things, and most of the sales are coming from Ireland. But you're right, Ireland is a small place where, you know, people are very comfortable, and if you challenge the narrative, there isn't as many outlets as there are, you know, in Britain. Like throughout Europe, there's a huge debate on Europe, a really ferocious debate. The opposition party in Germany has talked about leaving the EU. You
Yes.
know, in France and things. In Ireland, it's almost like as if we're asleep. That, you know, there are large discontents in Europe. You know, one of the best things about this book is a few very pro-European people have told me they thought it was a great idea because they said nobody pays any attention. And I remember, Pat, when I was at, say, heads of ambassadors meeting with ministers and things, and I'd raise an issue. I'd say, like, you know, if we don't help David Cameron, is there a chance that we could lose this? Because Brexit isn't good for Ireland because we need, you know, it's our main bilateral thing. And they never answered a fundamental question. It was always a bit of tittle-tattle about it. Oh, such and such a commissioner's, you know, loves Ireland or goes to holidays in Connemara. And I said, that's fine. But, you know, if we take the wrong line, and we did, we took a very hard line against
Oh,
Cameron when
it
went looking for, and it seemed that there was a disconnect between what was Ireland's interests and these people's thinking. And you know, I always resisted, to be honest with you, Pat. I resisted when the department sort of said, "Are you interested in, you know, stint in Brussels?" I said, no, I prefer Canberra, or I prefer, you know, I prefer the
yes. But
yeah, the Anglo world, if you like to put it like that.
But
But
what we were talking about there about sidelining people, the perfect example of that is in the vote, the Brexit vote in Britain, where whole swathes of people in north of England and all around the place were utterly ignored by mainstream media, both print and broadcast. And as a result, they were all surprised at the result, but the majority of people in Britain were not surprised.
yes, they see you know, it's the same here. A certain group of people believe that, you know, it must be ignorance that's giving this vote, you know,
Yeah,
or thing. I mean, when you read in Ireland, there was a few people, I won't name their names because I think, but they sort of said this is a demand for empire. Now the people in Huddersfield and in things, they weren't thinking of empire at
not
all.
at all.
They were trying to give a reason for this uh, that would suit themselves. It wasn't the fact that it was mainly a working class vote in Britain, overwhelmingly a working class vote of people who had never gained from empire at all, you know, in a place like Oldham and places.
And
And
Sunderland and all of those places, yeah.
yeah, so the idea is there's a sideline. In Ireland, I think one of the reasons why we've done very badly on Brexit, because I outlined this in the book. Number one, when Cameron said, don't appoint Jean-Claude Juncker as thing. He is a complete federalist. It's going to make me more difficult job. Ireland went against Cameron. When Cameron came to ask for, you know, a block on immigration for a period of time, even Ireland, I remember because I was in the senior civil service. There was utter determination that we're not going to give the Brits anything. And then when Theresa May came in and tried to be reasonable, we decided we wouldn't bend at all. It was only when we had the threat of Boris and things like that. Seamus Mallon said a very interesting thing during the negotiations. He said, you always let the other person get up with their trousers on. This was when some people were pushing the unionists too far. And he said, let them get up with their trousers on because they'll have to deliver the deal. Theresa May had to deliver the deal, but they gave her a terrible document to deliver. So they should have realised it. And now they're making concessions that if they'd given to Theresa May would have swept the thing through and we would have had a good, close relationship.
Should have been over long ago, and not forgetting our history with Britain, but they are our closest ally. They're geographically as well as everywhere else, and we have huge ties with Britain. And we should, as you said, we should stand up for Britain. I don't mean to take their side 100%, but really be pragmatic about these things. But when the dust has settled, we'll have to trade with Britain again, whether we like it or not. You know, and that to me was lost in the debate.
And it's the small businesses and the native businesses which are trading with Britain. If you look, and I always have these regular, they always quote figures, but they don't understand the figures. One thing at least they did in science was we spent a lot of time on statistics. The links between Ireland and continental Europe are the multinationals, and that is good, and multinationals are very good for Ireland.
Yeah.
But in the longer term, do we sacrifice all the small industries to placate the multinationals, whom President Trump and even the Democrats are talking about repatriating a lot of their activity there? We need a much more balanced approach. I always said that in the row between Brussels and London, we should have been the mediator, the bridge, not the cat's paw that Europe used against the British. We should have been somewhere halfway between where we would be, as you know, as the two governments did in Northern Ireland during the Good Friday negotiations. You go to one side and then you go to the other, and you're trying to bridge the gap, not taking a partisan line. But I sound like a broken record, Pat, sometimes.
No, I think that, and LíRmedia.tv, LíR Confidential is the program you're listening to, and my special guest is Ray Bassett. Now, Ray, do you think it's time for an Irexit party?
There's a few of them around, and to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I put it forward was to stimulate debate. I remember the first time I wrote Irexit, and I was writing in the Sunday Business Post. I almost like as Dracula, you know. I was so inculcated with it. So I think the European Union is changing, and changing for the worst. You know, when I was a columnist with the Business Post, I tried to get information about what we pay Europe and Europe pay us. And it took me a very long time. Most countries are very happy. We're giving them an awful lot of more money. And you know, with Britain leaving, what's going to happen? These huge fleets of ships that are going to come into our waters, we already get very little of it. And you know, as Europe expands further to the south and North Macedonia and Serbia, we're going to have to transfer huge resources in that direction.
Absolutely.
You know, our common agriculture, I think we should be trying to turn it, repatriate it, because Ireland can afford a reasonable support for the farming community. We couldn't when we joined, but we can now. So the balance is tilting. And the problem in Ireland is nobody will discuss the balance, you know, the balance. And remember, Canada has full access to the single market.
They have?
Virtually every one of their products. They have 98%, because they did the trade deal. And I'm sort of saying that, you know, maybe we should look at the way Norway operates, which operates very closely economically with the European Union, but doesn't go into its customs union.
It has benefits.
It has benefits, and they pay for anything that's in Europe that they want. And of course, they pay an awful lot less than we do. And their population's about the same, or maybe a small bit more. But we need to be looking at things rather than just sort of saying we're on Team EU. And I remember when I was told when I was Foreign Affairs, and I was raising the issue of were we going to help Cameron and various things. They said, no matter what the European Union decides, we're going with them. We're part of Team EU. And I said, I've never heard people sort of saying, we will accept the outcome of the negotiations before you start. There's no negotiations unless at some point you say, this has gone beyond what I can tolerate.
There isn't much talk in the media now of it but I mean, our Britain will be gone out of the EU before we know it anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. There'll be another change, a potential change in America, and it doesn't matter whether there is or not anyway. They're still going to do a deal with Britain and America, a trade deal. It looks like they will, of course, you know, some kind of a deal. And so these are the times that diplomacy is called for between Ireland and Britain at a huge, I don't know, is there much going on there? I have no idea. But the way the government at the moment are handling this so-called pandemic doesn't bode well for the cohesion of the government, this present government I'm talking about now, you know. What do you think of this?
Well, I think, Pat, the Irish government have got a bit of a fright, and you saw Simon Coveney saying that Ireland couldn't take a no deal Brexit and COVID. They couldn't. So I think that all the bellicose language is gone. There's no more, and there's no more talk about the border. It's about maintaining the single market. So the border, to some extent, was a red herring, which they were using. Yeah, on it. But I think the government are in a quandary because there are interests in Brussels which say we're not going to give the British anything because it'll only encourage others. Now, in the end, I'm a bit of an optimist. I think there may be something cobbled together because I think the individual states may decide, look, we've got to do some type of arrangement with Britain, but it won't be 100% satisfactory for us. And we should have been lobbying for the British to get the best possible deal, because the best possible deal is good for us. In the book, I quote one thing. There are 600,000 Irish-born people in Britain from the north and south, every one of them an Irish citizen. The nearest permanent population in another EU country is Spain with 17,000, 1/35 of what's in Britain. And sometimes they get lost on that all the time. There are more Irish people in Sydney than there are in Germany and France put together. Yep. So psychologically, during the Great Recession, every Irish person could migrate to Germany if they wanted to. But, there were 10,000 Canadian visas snapped up in a few minutes almost once they became. People wanted to go to Australia. That, there is an attempt to graft on this European identity. Now, we are Europeans, but our links with Boston, with Toronto, with Sydney, with Auckland are very, very strong. When I go, I use this example, Pat, that I won again at one of these conferences. I was telling them about discussions I had with the Canadian Prime Minister. I said, the Canadian Prime Minister doesn't see me on my own because of a Colgate ring of confidence. He does because it's important to him. All politics is local. And the Irish ambassador to Germany said he never had a conversation with Angela Merkel. It would never arise. You see, we're much more relevant to particularly people who are getting re-elected in North America than we are there. So we can go and get special deals from the Americans and the others if we use our strength in Congress and things like that. And that is never brought out in the Irish media, that the Irish ambassador to Germany wouldn't be having private conversations with Angela Merkel. As far as I know, I've never seen, and I used to see all the documents. And that's a huge difference to it. And I think we should, if for instance, Canada, the United States, and Britain start getting together on a trade deal, the United States and Britain are by far and away our largest trading partners. That we have got to be involved in that. I mean, there are some figures, and again, arguing. Somebody says, well, we export an awful lot to Belgium and Netherlands, but Belgium and Netherlands are the warehouses of Europe. It's like sort of saying the post office gets an awful lot of letters. Some of the stuff we send to Belgium comes back again. It's where they warehouse everything. And, a lot of countries actually put a proviso against some of these countries saying this is the Rotterdam effect, where it is a central depot for everything around the world.
Yeah.
So not to bore everybody, but I think if Britain and America are getting together and we're in between the two, and, again, I quote Irish investment. Irish investors go to America, Canada, and Britain. The amount of Irish investment in Germany, I think, is about 1.5 billion. There's 6 billion in Canada. There's nearly 100 billion in the United States. I think that we are putting a narrative out there, which when you start drilling down, is based on very little on very little foundation.
It doesn't make sense, as you said, when you really take a step back from the dramatic headlines and read behind it. Really, I don't think a change of president in America will make a whole lot of difference to this country economically, will it?
I don't. I think what do you call it? Trump is more protectionist, but I think the general view, particularly after COVID, where the United States found itself very heavily in deficit for all types of medical and pharmaceutical products, I think there's a general trend in sort of world economics. There are cycles where globalization, free trade is the dominant feature, and then it rolls back. I think we're heading into that area. But for those who believe that Britain won't do a deal with the United States if we get a Joe Biden presidency, should remember that the initial kickoff of the negotiations between Britain and the United States was a bipartisan delegation led by Paul Ryan, and it had the full support of the Democratic Party. Now, Britain has such links in the United States, yourself, on the military, on the security,
and
various things.
Absolutely.
It has huge clout. It doesn't have it at the political level that we have it, but it has at the institutional level. So I think it is inconceivable that there won't be a generous deal done between Britain and the United States. And the British will not let in chlorinated chicken and things like that. That's all red herrings, which are there to, pardon that, the mixture of the puns, to try
And before we leave the EU, I mean, just what I mean, leave discussing the EU. Let's be clear about this. That the original thing was the EEC, European Economic Community. I think we've moved away too far from it, from those principles, Ray.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think, and I would have supported joining the EEC as it was then. And and again, I don't want to be rabbiting the books. I say the people who kept pushing these treaties one after the other are the ones who are responsible for the present crisis in the EU. They're responsible for Brexit. I'm very pro-European. My daughter, one of the daughter-in-laws, one is Spanish, the other is Italian. I love this Erasmus and everything like that. But let's keep it at that. The people who are pushing all this huge infrastructure and the creation of a state and everything, that they are destroying cooperation between European states. You can see there's virtually, apart from Ireland, there's not many other countries that doesn't have a very, very strong now anti-EU movement in it. And it's because these people have pushed it far too far without consulting the populace. As you said, the way they treated the Brexit people in Britain, it's mirrored in places like Italy and Spain, where they people who raise a question are, too ignorant to be involved in this.
And I think there's a lot to be said for it, that too much power in the European Union is invested with unelected people.
Absolutely.
That is the kernel of the thing.
Yeah, there's been a huge transference of power even from the elected politicians in Ireland. It's all these subgroups meet, and the whole thing is designed so no power which has ever gone to Europe has ever been repatriated. We always talk about subsidiarity and things. There's virtually nothing. And the only people, like the European Parliament, cannot initiate legislation. They can't even amend existing legislation. The only people who can, in reality, who can initiate legislation is the Commission, which is not elected. The whole thing was set up so that, as I say in the book, Schreiber said, elections should not be allowed to change economic policy. So to say it's a democracy is stretching it.
But what surprises me looking in from the outside for a long time is the only elected, as you said there, Ray, and rightly so, the only elected element in the European Union is the Parliament.
Yeah.
Elected by all the citizens in each country. Therein, the power should lie.
Yes. But because it's a kind of an irrelevance, people elect people to the Parliament that they wouldn't if they thought they were running the place. I mean, it's an opportunity to give the government a kick in the backside, and it's the same all over Europe. And you get all to. I mean, we're not only we're not unique in Ireland having rather unusual MEPs sometimes.
Well, I suppose we can't boast when we look at some of the people we elect to our own Parliament.
That's true.
Do certain things, so. We have to be careful there.
If you listen to an EU debate in Irish Parliament, they clearly have no idea what it's about. And I remember as a civil servant, we'd be writing the speeches, and in some cases, even write them for the opposition. The opposition would ask for a speech from the civil service, just basically supporting it. And you watch the Parliament. The Dáil at the moment is a bit better than there was one before. The one before, everybody just read out. It was the dullest place in the world. I got the impression nothing was being decided there, and
there was no opposition or nothing.
Yeah, and nobody can interrupt another person, and nobody can. And the list of speakers is decided by the government chief whip with one or two other whips. I mean, it's hardly an open forum of debate.
Well, you can fall asleep.
Stop moaning.
When you can fall asleep and get a shout and say yes.
Yeah.
Does that not say it all?
Absolutely. You're told to vote, and then they go mad if somebody actually in the Parliament has an opinion of their own.
And by the way, listeners, the book is up behind me there. Ireland and the EU post Brexit. What do you see, Ray, in the book? and I must read it. I didn't. I have it now. I didn't read it yet. I didn't get a chance. But how do you see it unfolding in next year? Obviously, this pandemic thing put a huge spanner in the works.
Yeah, I think Ireland is going to wake up and become much more like the other European countries. Too much for too long. Our view on Europe has been in the kind of orange green stuff and the British Irish stuff. I think when we find ourselves that we're living in this island behind a bigger island and away from Europe, we've 1% of the voting strength in the European Council. So we're going to find it that we're going. I think it's going to dawn on us that we have made a mistake with the British, that we should have worked very hard on keeping them in. And if they left, we probably needed a special arrangement from Ireland where we kept an awful of our links with Britain, but also kept some with Europe. We shouldn't have decided that we're jumping totally 100% on one side. So, Pat, to summarise, I think there's going to be a realisation in the new year once Britain leaves, and we suddenly find that even the stuff we're sending to the continent has to go through Britain. And, it only takes one cowboy to start, if we get special arrangements, to stick a load of contraband in it for us to suddenly start finding all our stuff being watched. And the other route, the route from Rosslare, is not really viable with perishable goods of 42 hours. I think we're in for a cold shower.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm wrong, because I hope that I'm still a nationalist and I still want the country to do well, but I think we may be in for a very cold shower in the early part of 2021.
And before we finish up, Ray, I think that Boris Johnson, the Tories are going to be in power for the next 7 or 8 or 9 years in Britain, by the look of things.
Yeah, it looks no party has ever come back from the level that the Labour Party is at.
It'll take another election or two for that to happen, the way their voting system is.
Absolutely, and I think so. We helped to destroy the moderate wing of the Conservative Party, the David Lidington and everything like that. And with a policy, I think you have to look back on it. Did it achieve its aim? And I think when you look at the Irish government policy on Brexit, I don't think even the most favourably disposed person would say it actually achieved its aim, because we're in a difficult situation now, and COVID in many ways is covering that. But COVID, as the departure comes and COVID hopefully is brought under control, I think we will, as I say, be waking up to a more difficult situation.
I know, yeah, you can have only 5 people on your house, Ray.
Yeah.
Or you'll get the COVID. But you can go to a wedding with 50 people and you won't get it. That's the latest from our government.
I know, and apparently that there was a long row over that.
Okay. Look, before we finish, Ray, you have to say a big shout out to Sue Faye Healy and Jen Healy in Ottawa.
They're 2 great pals of mine, 2 real dubs, by the way.
Well, go away.
We used to have a thing called the Dubs Club, which we met.
Go away.
No, Pat, no one else would have us in their club.
And Healy are Southsiders.
Well, we let them in occasionally,
All right, so. And also to Bernadette and Marie Short in Montreal as well.
And also Pat. Pat's the dad there, so I'll say hello to Pat as well. So to the Short family, it's great. It's terrific what those people are doing and keeping our culture alive in a place like Canada. And they're unsung heroes.
Absolutely, and I met some of them when I worked in London in '73, but the people involved in the Irish diaspora, so to speak, there, and the support is, you have to see it on the ground to appreciate it. But as I said, Ray, it's been a blast altogether for me anyway. I don't know how about you. We got to well over an hour and 10 minutes, I think. And for everybody here in LíR Media and on this program, on LíR Confidential, and for myself, Pat Barry, and Mr. Ray Bassett for taking the time to speak to us this morning, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat, and all the best.
And from LíR Confidential, it's goodbye and God bless till we meet again. 5, 4, 3, 2. Now, Ray, I didn't want to finish the program because we'd be cut off immediately, you know.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so we are going to do. This will probably go out tomorrow, but I think you're okay with everything that was said in it anyway.
I am, yeah. As I said, it's the great thing of return is that I've no boss to. If ever it was on the radio, you get bloody people. The minister wants to have a quick word with you. What did you mean by this? Now, if I make a mistake, it's my own mistake.
Yeah.
Okay, Pat. Listen, I'm going to run. Actually, I'm off to a wedding in Sneem.
Oh, be good.
So what do you call it? I'm worried it's 50 people. Will I be spreading?
Are you the 51st state?
I think I will be. I'm prepared to go onto the bench.
Enjoy your day and your family, and thank you very much again.
All the best. Bye bye.